We'll come to Angela Hanson, who is the innovation lead in the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. Angela, as you start giving us a sense of what you do and how this tension between experimentation and evidence plays out in your work, one of the points that I heard a lot, and a lot of colleagues also confirmed that to me, was the sense that micro-level experiments are all good and nice, but they're not big enough, how should I say, they don't lend themselves for actual policy making. They don't inform policy decisions per se, and they are really difficult to scale or to bring to national attention or kind of higher level attention. What's your take on that as you describe your work? And thanks for being with us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, a very interesting tension of a question of scale, right? And so my background is in ecosystem science. And for the past few years, I've been working on innovation teams with designers. So I think that's maybe given me an equal skepticism and healthy skepticism for many types of evidence and experimentation, different types of reasoning, deductive, inductive, abductive. And really the conclusion that I came to and the first two panelists mentioned was that there's no silver bullet. There's no one method to rule them all. So I work at the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is one of the largest evidence-producing policy analysis shops working at the international level. So of course there's a bias towards evidence. On my team, I work in a little innovation lab within the OECD, and we focus on kind of this tension, right? This experimentation, evidence, it's all important. How do we find the right balance? How do we get experimentation to scale? So those are the kinds of approaches, the questions that we're asking. So what we do is we provide trusted neutral advice to largely national governments. We surface global trends of innovation. We look at the latest practices, who's doing something really interesting, either in evidence or experimentation or other areas entirely. And we do empirics-led research and innovation reviews. So that shows us, it kind of gives us a bird's eye view of a lot of what's happening. And what's really interesting is, we get to work not just in OECD countries, which are the 36 kind of rich nations of the world, and that map is in some ways opposite of a lot of UNDP areas of interest. But in our team, we get to look beyond the traditional economies and look at what local level is doing, look at what, beyond the OECD countries. So it's really informs a lot. So in our work, we see lots of different types of innovation, and innovation is this word that gets thrown around for everything. And one of the most common questions we get asked, or one of the most common challenges we're asked to guide national governments through is, well, what is it and what's it for? And you'd be really surprised at how few governments really have built a shared consensus around that. And so through our work, we developed a model for kind of thinking and framing innovation in a government. So we look at kind of two dimensions. How directed is the innovation? What's the level of direction kind of from the top? And then what's the level of certainty or uncertainty? Directed innovation, we call kind of mission-oriented innovation. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a great example. We need to achieve these missions. We need to put a person on the moon. Let's all rally around, let's change what we're doing, let's all reorient around these things. We have a problem to solve and it's big. Undirected is more bottom-up. So the pace of change outside of government is bigger than inside of government. And what are those channels that we will create to let some of those changes in and kind of focus on entrepreneurial discovery? When you have a lot of certainty in your work, the systems that you have and the kind of services that government provides does not need to be replaced, but needs to be made better. This is an area of enhancement oriented innovation. So things like using behavioral insights to get people to pay their taxes on time. It's not replacing the system of taxation, it's making it better. This is what governments do really, really, really well, and where a lot of innovation tends to focus. And then anticipatory innovation. So these are changes like, what does government do, what did government do when all of a sudden the automobile came and we had to reorient mobility? And looking at now, what is gene editing going to do to society? What does that do to how we govern? AI, et cetera. Lots of technology-driven changes are going to entirely replace systems that we currently use and the services that government delivers. So all models are wrong, but some are useful. So this is just for framing and getting governments to look at different angles of how innovation's being used. It's not for categorization. And the key point here is that measurement looks really different for each of these. Evidence looks very different for each of these. And by the way, I agree that experimentation can also create evidence. Evaluation methodologies look very different in these different areas. Change happens very differently. So for instance, randomized control trials may work really, really well for enhancement-oriented innovation. Narrative-based research and weak signal detection may work really well for anticipatory innovation, but they're different. They're for different purposes. So the first step is trying to determine what is innovation for, and how are you going to approach it? Because you can't have just one kind of innovation. You can't have an overbalance in one, or you will will not work. I've seen it. So one of the things I want to share with you is a tool that I've been working on the past year called the Toolkit Navigator. And this is really to kind of build off of the need for methodological flexibility for different kinds of innovation, different kinds of evidence, different kinds of experimentation based on the problem and the context that you're in, is this Toolkit Navigator. So it contains hundreds of existing, largely designed toolkits, but not just design toolkits, also futures, behavioral insights, systems. And they all have unique bias built in. They all have unique ways that they can be applied. So this meta tool is a way of navigating through these tools, connecting people with the context that they're in and the methods that might work best in those situations. So it connects cases as well of innovations that have happened in a specific context. So the tax example using behavioral insights would be connected to the people who worked on it, as well as toolkits related to how to put that into practice. We focus on toolkits that are adaptable and usable in other contexts, because that is a great way of building capacity in government. I realize I don't have the URL on here. I'm really sorry about that. But it is oe.cd/toolkit. oe.cd/toolkit. And I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about it. It's a prototype, it's a beta, it's an experiment in and of itself. And so to kind of close out the evidence versus experimentation tension is that it's not a versus. Of course, it depends, which is the most frustrating answer you can give. But I think what's also interesting is to ask, how do we create better demand for evidence or experimentation? Who's listening? Who wants this information? Because if there's not demand and that's not reaching decision makers, then what are we all doing? I think experimentation is really useful because it gets people started. You know, a lot of times in government it's very slow to act, and you're working in a complex system. Sometimes you don't know you don't know enough about the system until you poke it a bit, see what happens. So that also depends on having good feedback loops to inform what has happened as a result of that prodding of the system you're working in. And then related to the first point of who's listening, where's their demand, innovation is political. You are really asking to change the legitimacy. Who has the right to legitimacy? So I think I'll leave it with that provocation and move on to the next panelist.
Great. Thanks very much.